I really appreciate it. Typically, I've done 3 or 4 signings, and they've set it up where the laws here are restrictive, to say the least. So every signing I've had, you can taste it at a distillery. Really, that's all the only place you could taste, unless you get a special permit. And some of the bookstores, Quail Ridge and Park Road in Charlotte, I hope, and Regulator in Durham, we've had distillers there. And we've been allowed to pour a little bit, which makes it easier for me, and probably more interesting as well, too. As Donna mentioned, what happened was I was working for a national website in 2015, a week before Christmas, 1 week before Christmas. And they called and said, you don't have a job anymore. Yeah, it was a funding issue, I guess. So I didn't have a job, and I started doing some blogs. We had been on a bourbon trail, and I really developed an interest for whiskey and just the scene, the smells, the sights, the sounds, the tastes of bourbon and the whole atmosphere, the whole heritage, the entire history. Well, I had done that, and I was blogging a little bit here and there, and my wife came home one day, and I meant to bring it, but it's the original passport. Kentucky Bourbon Trail, you get a passport. And then you go to like the 8 or 9 distilleries, and they'll mark it off for you, and it takes about 4 days. My wife came home one day, my lovely wife, who took pictures in the book. Let me point that out. It was an integral part of the entire process. It's right there. So, anyway, she came home one day and kind of, with this passport in hand, kind of threw it at me, and she's like, "You ought to check this out." I guess she had gotten it at Sutler's Distillery in Winston-Salem, which he makes gin. And it was really novel to me. I'm like, what? I mean, people are making liquor here? And it's one of those things kind of like in your back of your mind. You kind of know, but you really don't know, because, I mean, North Carolina's been great with wine, and then recently craft beer. And she kind of tossed this passport at me, and I kind of let it go for a while. And I started looking at it. I was like, well, I need to do something, so let me make a couple calls. And the first one I did was at Sutler's in Winston-Salem. I called it Esteban McMahon at Topo in Chapel Hill. And he starts telling me about the Distillers Association and what they're trying to do and what they do. And this was all new to me. So I started looking through this passport. We went to Durham. We went to Mount Airy, Mayberry Distillers. And just the different processes and the uniqueness. And everybody's got such a great story. And I think that's what makes this book so awesome. Is, well, not because I wrote it, but everybody's covered this industry piecemeal-wise. It's like newspapers will do a story here, a story there, but nobody's kind of put it together. So I was doing several blogs, and then remember now, I didn't have a job. So my wife's like, you might want to try to parlay this into something that actually pays you.
And something more than bourbon.
Right. So, yeah, because, too, we go to these distilleries and it'd be so awesome, just be just fantastic stuff, sorghum whiskey and, gin with, some great orange peel flavor or coriander. And we'd buy bottles. 1 bottle per year per customer. Remember that. I'll come back to that later. So we'd buy bottles, and, they weren't exactly given to me either. So they were cheap. So she said, put in a proposal, and I did. And Blair, which has been great, picked up on it. It went through. I know John had a book through Blair. So, they said, go ahead and write it. And I'm like, well, wow, that's awesome. It was like, I think, April at the time. And we were, it was busy summer because one of the boys were playing travel baseball, and we were driving around basically North Carolina. We were on our way to Kannapolis. We were talking. I had gotten an email from the people at Blair, and she's like, well, when can you have it done? And I looked at my wife. We're at a car wash, in Walkertown on our way to Kannapolis. And she's like, oh, you got to get it done. It's hot. So tell them September 1st. And it says April. I'm like, okay, September 1st. Oh, yay, September 1st. Go for it. Oh, I found out there's close to 40 distilleries in North Carolina. From basically Asheville to Manteo, Kings Mountain. So they really stretch from Manteo to Asheville and Marshall. There's a guy in Marshall that makes moonshine, but I could never get up with him. We probably would have never found it anyways. So, there's 36 distilleries in a book profiled, and there's more than 40 making liquor right now, and it's quite a labyrinth to get through the process. There's state, then there's federal, TTB, but I know the TTB people who have filed for permits, there's close to 70, I think. And Esteban at Topo thinks there will be 70 by the end of the year in operation. I know old Nick Williams in Louisville, it was one of the first distilleries in North Carolina, and I think his great-grandsons are reviving it with a similar recipe. I mean, it's been out on the market for a while. Another distiller is making it, but he's been barreling it for a couple years, and it's good stuff. And I think he's got a bourbon ready to come out. Don't quote me on that, but June 17th that opens in Louisville. But at one time, North Carolina is funny in this way. At one time, there were more distilleries here, or at least as best a quick Google search and some anecdotal information I could find. Back before Prohibition, there was close to 500. Now, a lot of these were on farms and small operations, small stills. But then Prohibition hit in 1908 here, and didn't end until 38 when the ABC came on board. So, and they at that time allowed beer and wine. The legislature, General Assembly, approved liquor in 1979 to be made in North Carolina, not until 1979. And remember, these guys in Kentucky and Tennessee have a huge head start on us. I mean, they've been barreling since Prohibition. So it's really a nascent industry, and we didn't get our first distillery here. And when I say distillery, it's Piedmont Distillers in Madison, which is north of Greensboro, between Greensboro and Winston. They were the first in 2005. And what they do is, this is a whole other aspect of it. They don't really distill, but he buys alcohol as a commodity from Indiana or Michigan. MGP it's called, I think Midwest Grain Products, and they'll make any liquor you want them to, And that's what you got to be careful when you're buying it. They'll put, your granddaddy's 100-year-old recipe, but they bought it from Indiana. So, and that's not disparaging them. Some of them is very good, and it depends on how they age it and everything. But it's important when you're looking at a bottle of liquor. If you're a connoisseur, and I know you, John, you know this, if it says produced by or made by, that's a good indication that they didn't distill it, and that's part of the process. But I think what's cool about this book, I had written it originally according to spirits. I took vodka and moonshine and gin and did it that way, and it's like, no. We want you to do west to east. So basically that's what the book is. It starts west with Asheville and ends east in Manteo. And with all these distillers in between, there's several here. Raleigh Rum, 78 degrees Celsius, Pine Top, Lassiter's and Nightdale, and more coming online all the time. And, moonshine, too, that's why Joe Mihalik at Piedmont Distillers got a jump on everybody with the Midnight Moon. I'm sure you've heard of Midnight Moon and Junior Johnson Midnight Moon. Cat Daddy was his first product because of the moonshine heritage. You know, it's been made in the hills here still forever. You know, and under the federal government's regulations, there aren't any rules governing moonshine. Now, if you make a vodka, it's got to be distilled so high. If you make a gin, it's got to include so much juniper. If you make whiskey, to call it straight whiskey, it's got to be aged 2 years. Bourbon's got to be aged for 2 years. Typically, they age it 4 years. Not 51% corn. You know, not more than 125 proof into the barrel. So 165 proof into the barrel or whatever. But yeah, there's rules for everything else, is my point. But for moonshine, there aren't any. So some people use rye, some people use corn, and the operations just differ crazily. As you know, my wife could attest. You go to Topo, where they have, I think it's a Koth still. It's a German still. I think it's a Koth. And there's Carl, and there's Holstein too. There's a couple other ones that make German stills, but it's a pristine still with a column that basically distills it every step of the way, you know, like 14 or 15 times it's going through these and going up and down and distilling. So it's a clear, clean liquid. And then you have Howling Moon, which, you know, it's in the book. These guys are Scotch-Irish descendants, and they brought it to North Carolina, and these guys have been making, in the family, moonshine for 100 years. Now it's legal moonshine, which is, and they use a condenser that's 150 years old, the part that cools the vapors that make the whiskey or the spirit. And it's, they don't really give tours. There was a one, because they're not set up to. There's a facility just not set up to. It's in a neighborhood and it's nondescript building, but they're great guys and they do it real, and that's what he cares about. Because a lot of the stuff, you know, when you see moonshine, if you go into a shelf and you see, you know, Sugarlands or Midnight, you know, I don't want to say Midnight Moon because he is a friend of ours, but with Sugarlands and Old Smoky, a lot of that's neutral grain spirits, and it's really not moonshine. And when you're buying stuff here, and I think you'll find with the distillers that it's made from the ground up, whether it's corn, whether it's rye. Topo in Chapel Hill uses red organic wheat from a farm in Scotland Neck. But the guy was about going out of business, and Topo's thinking, well, what can we do? They make beer, but they don't really bottle beer or can beer. And he's like, we could do a winery. He was like, that takes too long, and it's already flooded. He's like, well, let's make whiskey. And this guy had this wheat that really, you know, nobody was buying necessarily, and they're like, let's do this. So they make a gin, a vodka, a whiskey, all from this red organic wheat. I mean, the stories just go there. And what I want to stress here, it's whether you drink or not, just the determination, the entrepreneurship, the innovation. You know, it's funny, we were at an American Distilling Conference in Baltimore a couple months ago, and we were telling them about the law. You know, I said, well, you could buy one bottle. And they're like, and John Gouzet, by the way, did a great piece for John Locke on this, on the whole bootleggers and Baptists and the rules in North Carolina, how restrictive they really are. And we told a guy, I think from Washington, we're like, yeah, you could buy one bottle. It's like, you mean per visit? I was like, no, per year. And per person. So you give them your driver's license, and then you can come back a year from that day and get another bottle. So, you know, if you're having a big wedding or something like that, you're kind of, there was a move, when was it, last year or the year before, to allow one bottle of each product they make. Where like Topo makes 5 things, the Calls make like 5 things. But that got thrown under the bus too. And there's Senate Bill 155 now, it's in finance, and we're not sure if they're going to, Becky seems sure that it's going to go. We're not sure when, but. Yeah, it's the media, much of the media has picked it up. with the brunch aspect, meaning, you can't now buy liquor on Sundays before noon. Well, this would allow you to get a mimosa at 10 o'clock in the morning. But it wouldn't apply to grocery stores, however, I don't think. It's just, and some people on both sides, like Scott Maitland at Tapa, would help him in a couple of different directions. But that's sitting there now, and most of the media has picked up on the brunch part. It also would allow tastings off-site. Like I was mentioning, the bookstores, they have tasting at a bookstore. Like if, Corey unfortunately didn't get the permit, we could have the tasting here. Could have brought in several distillers, but yeah, they've got to get a permit. It's like $50, and then per time, I think. And there's a criminal background check, and so it's jumping through hoops. And you can't really, like a lot of beer makers will just make a sweet cherry grapefruit gosa and say, oh, look what we did last night, and serve it, and that'll be that. Or make a stout. It's like, oh yeah, milk chocolate, creamy, nutty stout. But distillers can't do that. They can't make a one-off. They've got to make so much and to satisfy ABC demands, and they've got to keep it in the ABC store. So too, everything goes through Raleigh. So if you're in Manteo or Asheville making liquor, it goes through Raleigh. It's, no matter if you're shipping it, down the street a mile, got to go through Raleigh, then back. So you would think, there should be more efficient ways around that. But like the new bill, this 155 would allow 5 bottles per year per customer, which would certainly help these guys. Well, like I said in the book, it's just fantastic about the stories. The calls in Wilkes County, they're in Wilkesboro, right? And Copper Barrel's in North Wilkesboro. They make moonshine, but he bought a Vendome still from Kentucky, which is kind of the gold standard of stills, where most of the distillers in Kentucky use them. Put it on the back of a flatbed, designed it himself, put it on the back of a flatbed, drove it out to Wilkes County, and they make all their mash barrels where they make the mash for the moonshine from pine. That was right there too, and everything's kind of self-contained. They get the grain down the road at a mill. And Willie Clay Call was an infamous moonshiner. I mean, Junior Johnson kind of overshadows everybody in that regard. But he was one of the original moonshiners, and it was his dad. He has this big old, I think it's a New Yorker, that holds 300 milk jugs of moonshine that's on display at the distillery. That's how they transport it. And he'd dress up and everything and just ride around with his moonshine, and nobody would bat an eye. But they might, well, I mean, he never served time, I don't think. Is that right, Lisa? I don't think he served time, but they did get him for it wasn't bootlegging, which is the process of moving it from here to there, but it was for some kind of tax deal or something, some kind of racketeering thing. But they're a great story too, and interesting with them, they go back to a guy named Reverend Daniel Call, who was a Lutheran minister, and this is a true story because it was backed up when we went to the Jack Daniel's distillery, that he taught Jack Daniel when he was like 16 or something, bought Reverend Call's still because the congregation or his wife. And Brad Call, who's Brian's nephew, showed a picture of his wife, and yeah, he wasn't going to say no. She's like, get rid of that thing, The congregation doesn't like it. You don't need to be making liquor, and he sold it to Jack Daniel. And they tell this story at the Jack Daniel distillery too. So it is actually true. And Buck Nance, who's is about 75, and George Smith in North Wilkes, he wanted to. He was from Vermont, and he came down and wanted to start a whiskey business. And he was playing here and there, and Buck Nance came, and one day and he's like, I've been doing this a long time. He's like, I'll show you how to do it. And he built a still. So when you're buying North Carolina liquor, you're not only buying really, really good stuff, you're also promoting the states, promoting tourism. I think the North Carolina Department of Agriculture is an $84 billion business. And it's the largest business in the state. So a lot the corn, the wheat, the rye. There's a guy in the Troy and Sons in Asheville uses white heirloom corn, where the corn was. I mean, he had just this corn on his farm, and he basically used it to eat corn, make cornbread out of, and didn't really know what to do with it. And she was Troy Ball was looking for the right grain, and she kind of hooked up with him, and they start playing in a shed with it now, which is technically illegal. Yeah, don't do this at home because it is not technically, it is illegal. But you can't make liquor until you have a permit. So it's tough to practice. Well, you have to have a still, and they come and say, make sure you have a still. And it's like my friend Philip O'Hara in Jacksonville who pounded out. It's not the most beautiful thing in the world. And we went to, when we were going on our distillery tour, we have 14-year-old, twin boys who, we're going to the beach, guys. Just got to stop at a couple distilleries first. and they just roll their eyes, And there was Philip O'Hara's place in Jacksonville. We went down a dirt road and another gravel road, and next thing we know, we're up on a slate heap. It's like, I don't think it's this way. We back down and poured it. It's basically in a barn, and he pounded out this still by himself. And he makes some really good, bourbon-like, Scotch-like. He wanted to, balance the bourbon and Scotch. I know Donna mentioned sweet potatoes. There's sweet in Snow Hill, which is east. It's near Kinston, in that area, down east. And Yamco, which is these couple of farmers, were sweet potato farmers. And when you cultivate or harvest the sweet potatoes, you run through the field, and it kind of tears a bunch of them up, and they're not all pretty because apparently when you buy sweet potatoes at a store, they've got to be really pretty and pristine and nice. And the machine would tear them up. And they're like, well, what do we do with this stuff? Well, they'd already been pureeing sweet potatoes and pureeing pumpkins in a really factory setting. And they're like, we could make liquor with this. And they do, and they make a sweet potato vodka. Mount Airy, Mayberry, Van McCoy, who's a former monk. For about 30 years he was a monk. And he came back to Mount Airy. His mother was getting older. He went to take care of her. And he's like, he tells a story when he was younger, he had set a pressure cooker up with a coil and everything into the stink. And his mother came home. It's like, what are you doing? He's like, you're making liquor, aren't you? He's like, yeah. He was like 14 because he had gone to some camp in Western Carolina, and it was about Appalachian history, but the moonshine was a small aspect of it. He's like, that's interesting. His mother came home and caught him. She's like, you're making moonshine, aren't you? You got to hear him tell it, but he's like, uh-huh. And she's like, I should have known. Your whole family's done it for years. So, but he makes a whiskey out of sorghum, and he calls it a whiskey because it's made from the sorghum grain. And he puts on a whole show. He'll dress up like a moonshiner, and then he'll change clothes and dress up like a scientist. And I mean, if you're ever in that area, it's certainly worth seeing. And a lot of people here are making rum, locally sourced. While you can't buy sugar cane necessarily in North Carolina or molasses, but Outer Banks makes pecans and honey, which is locally sourced, and it's incredible. I mean, to sit on a beach and with some Coke and that's some of that stuff. It's like, this is dangerously delicious, as we say. And he tells a story, Scott Smith, at Outer Banks of. They're in Manteo, so people visit Manteo. They don't visit Snow Hill necessarily. Jimbo Eason, who did a book signing at Quail Ridge, he's like, yeah, we built a Walmart Express and thought that would get people in off the highway. It didn't work. It didn't even work for the Walmart Express because it closed. And Now it's a Dollar General. But yeah, he was going to. A woman, she was in her 90s. He said, "I want a mojito. Make me a mojito." And you know, when you're 90 years old, you should get what you want. And he's like, "I'd love to, but I can't." I was like, "What do you mean? I can't. I could give you 1.5 ounces total of everything we've got." So I mean, that's part and parcel of the rules. I know this is one of Lisa's favorite stories, the 7 Jars in Charlotte, where his father was like a big businessman in town. He had a nightclub, and that's where, he met his mother. I can't think of his name off the top of my head, the 7 Jars, who owns it, but there's a story in a book about it. And they were getting ready to sell the property or move, and they knew that, the father who had died made liquor, but they were getting ready to move or sell the property, and he had buried 7 jars with the recipes and other stuff which he won't talk about in the ground out on the property. And she's like, his mother got him up one night. He's like, we got to get this stuff before somebody finds it. And he's like, we don't know where it is. It's out there somewhere on several acres. Well, so she's out there holding a flashlight, and he's got a backhoe, and they're digging up here and there and to find these 7 jars. So he did find the recipes, and and now he makes the liquor. And I mean, the local products too, the dairy chocolate, which is in Raleigh. Durham Distillery uses it in their Damn Fine liqueur, which is Damn Fine's the brand name. So, but yeah, the laws are very restrictive. Southern Grace, which makes a 130 proof. Yeah, it's no joke. Sundog, it's called, and it's a moonshine. There's some rye and corn in it. But they moved into a prison in Mount Pleasant. It was the old Cabarrus County Correctional Facility. So they're set up in a prison, and they're barreling. And yeah, I mean, it's really neat. I mean, there's just tons and tons of stories. I want to kind of get to questions. And what's important here is when you're distilling, you'll come out, the run will come out as 4 shots, which are bad. And the heads, which contain like acetone and methanol, which, would kill you if you, but, and then there's the heart, there's your good run through the middle, and then the end is tails, which is fusel oils and stuff that's crappy. But a lot of these distillers, the big guys, the Bacardis, the Beams, they re-distill the tails. So and obviously it's more efficient that way, but here they don't do that. So you're getting basically all hearts. And the issue is too with if you've ever visited an ABC store, sometimes North Carolina section's out front, sometimes it's in the back, sometimes it's in the corner. And these guys are fighting for shelf space with Jim Beam and Crown Royal and Bacardi and whoever else, and who are basically printing money. I know firsthand they're printing money, these big distillers. And Scott Sanborn of Sutlers told me, he's like, yeah, we just want to, if we could get a foothold in North Carolina and I can go out and buy some sushi every once in a while, we'll be all right. But we're not necessarily not going to be rich. And, it's real too. And we were talking about the festivals and stuff. I go to a festival, somebody have a jar of moonshine and they'll say, oh, is it really moonshine? And it's like, I had a jar of Call stuff. And they're like, this guy, I said, you want a swig? He's like, is it really moonshine? It's like, it says it, moonshine, right on the bottle. He's like, oh, no. I mean, it's silly because it's the same recipes, plus it's in a sanitary building. As Brian Call said, you're not stopping halfway through the run to pull a possum or a squirrel out of your mash tank. So I mean, it's a big challenge for these guys in many areas, but their support, I mean, they would appreciate everybody's support. And I think part of the reason I did the book, it cumulatively pulls everything together, and hopefully there'll be more additions because there are already about 10 distilleries up and running that aren't in the book. So Basically, I guess I could talk all day, but that's all I got. If